Hey guys, renting a property as an expat in the UK is stressful, but it's not impossible. So here's how to do it. Now, first up, the first property is the hardest. It's helpful to just recognize that this first one will be the most difficult. It is not always that difficult, but the first one is. Now, before you can get approved for a flat in the UK, you're gonna need a couple of things set up first. That is a bank account and a job. When you apply for a flat, there's a check done on you, and they want to see that A, you have access to money, but you also have regular income coming in that allows you to afford the property you're going after. Now, of course, you need somewhere to sleep while you're doing all this. So a lot of expats will look at like short-term rentals, such as renting a room somewhere. Typically, you don't have to do a deep financial check for that sort of thing, or even staying at a hostel. It's way cheaper than a hotel, but you still have a place to live. You don't have to provide a financial check. You can stay at a hostel long-term. Long-term could be, a couple of weeks, a month even, while you get your bank account set up and your job lined up. Now, here in the UK, there are some word differences. So where as a Canadian, I would typically say an apartment, here in the UK, they are called flats. A row house or a townhouse back in America, here is typically a terraced property. The Brits also use the word detached for any home or property that is detached. And the way that a lot of homes are built here, detached homes are actually quite a bit more rare than what you would see in Canada or the US. Now, there are a lot of different variations, like a studio perhaps, but the main thing to remember is an apartment here in the UK is a flat. And while the Brits do say rent or to rent, they also say let. So to let or a letting agency, it all means rentals. Now, the price of rent here in the UK is really hard to talk about because they are so wildly different depending on what part of the country you're looking at. Now, of course, London is one of the most expensive places, but of course, lots of young expats have their heart set on living in London. And if that is the case for you, please understand that the rental prices are just unreal, unfortunately. So to rent a room, one single room in a flat shared by a whole bunch of people in London, especially central London, you're looking of upwards £1,000 per month. But for that price, and sometimes much less than that, you could rent an entire home in the north of England. So the price of rent really varies from place to place. London is one of the most expensive, and typically the north of England is far cheaper than the south. But again, it's really going to depend on where you are looking. A hot tip for London, actually two hot tips. Number one, you are probably not going to be able to afford to rent a flat in London. The prices are just unreasonable. So realistically, you are going to look to rent a room in a property shared by other people. Number two, London properties are really competitive. So if you view a room and you really like it, you need to submit your interest for that room almost immediately. Do not play hard to get. Do not take a couple of days to think it over, because in all likelihood, it'll be gone. When renting a property in the UK, one of the biggest questions are, what documents do I need to provide? Now, the main thing is, as a foreigner, you need to prove your legal ability to live in the UK and to stay in the UK. The letting agency or the landlord needs to confirm that you are not, in fact, a tourist, but you are actually allowed to be in the UK. The best way to prove that you are allowed to be in the UK and that you are not a tourist is by providing your biometrics residence permit. Now, most visas have this permit card. That's what I've used to prove my legal ability to be here. Typically, I'm not asked for more than that because it is a photo piece of ID It is a government official piece of ID, and it'll have details on your visa and the expiry date. But you may also be asked for your passport, or if you are a student, you are typically asked for a letter from your university. So the first step is to prove who you are and that you are allowed to be here. The next step is to prove that you earn enough money to rent that property. So documents that you would need for that part of the check are things like bank statements or pay stubs, or even a letter from your employer confirming your employment. If you are new to the UK and you don't have any sort of credit score, because usually they'll look at your credit score as well, you may have to provide more documents and more information at the beginning to sort of supplement not having a credit score. But later on, like myself, I've been here for 7 years now, I don't need to provide like employment contracts or a letter from my employer, because I can prove like, yeah, I have a credit score and yeah, I have a job. It's a lot easier later on. But definitely at the beginning, no credit score, you may need to provide more documents than normal. Now, will you need to pay a deposit? This is almost guaranteed for most properties. I won't say all, but it's like 99% of properties you will be asked to pay a deposit. Your tenancy deposit will usually be the same amount as 4 or 5 weeks rent. And please remember, it is illegal for your landlord to force you to pay a deposit of more than 5 weeks rent or 6 weeks rent if your annual rent is more than $50,000. If you're a new expat, if you're a young person, I'm going to assume your rent is not above $50,000 a year. But please know that there are a lot of laws and regulations around renting, around deposits. Your landlord cannot ask for more than 5 weeks rent as a deposit. Now, one very important element when it comes to renting in the UK is landlord or letting agency. Now, typically here, there are 2 main ways to rent a property, either directly from a landlord or through a letting agency or a renting agency. The Brits really like to say letting, so it's typically a letting agency. Now, the main difference between the two is your distance to the landlord. So of course, if you are renting directly from a private landlord, you are in direct contact with them. So any issues about rent payments, any issues about repairs or problems with the property, you are dealing directly with the landlord. With a letting agency, you deal directly with the letting agency. So you go to them with any issues and they then correspond with the landlord. They're basically like a middleman or a mediator if things get difficult. Now, letting agencies are typically more knowledgeable. They understand the law and the regulations when it comes to letting. Not to say that a private landlord wouldn't know those things, but they could be less knowledgeable, or they could perhaps try to do things that are not legal. Whether it's with malice or not, they might not even know. For me personally, I lean towards using letting agencies. I like having a professional in between me and the landlord. I like dealing with someone who knows what they're doing, who knows the law, and who hopefully acts in good faith. I just find that when you are dealing with money and with property, things can be quite heated. So personally, I would rather not deal with the landlord at all and just deal with a letting agency. So what are the best websites to find a flat to rent in the UK? There are tons, but I have some personal favorites. I'll put all the links in the description, but we are looking at websites like Rightmove, Zoopla, On the Market, Your Move, and Spare Room. Now, Spare Room, as the title implies, is predominantly focused on renting a room. This website is so good for people looking to live in big cities like London or like Edinburgh, where the cost of properties are too high for you to rent a flat yourself, but you can rent a room and have flatmates. Are bills included with properties? So typically when you rent a flat or a semi-detached, the bills are your own responsibility. In the property listing, whether it is a flat that you are looking at or you're looking at Spare Room, In that listing, it should say what bills are included and how much. I have found from my own experience, all of the flats that I have rented, no bills are included. So we're talking water, electricity, gas, internet, none of those things have been included in my tenancy agreement. Saying that though, a lot of listings on spare room typically include some type of bills. So just make sure to check if that is the route you're going to go down. You'll also want to make sure if your rent is per calendar week, which is quite common when you rent a room, or per calendar month. So you're paying monthly, which is typically the way flats and homes operate. Because renting a room can be very short term, a lot of them are per week. Because flats and homes are typically long term, most of them are monthly rents. Now, what is the renting process like here in the UK? So to get started, you basically want to go online. So any one of the websites in the video description are good options. You can also set up email alerts, which are super helpful. So in that particular website, say it's Zoopla, you can plug in the specifications of the property that you want, and then you can get emailed anytime a property comes up that matches that description. Now, whether you find a property from an email alert or just searching Zoopla, you are going to want to contact them through the website. There'll basically be like an email us button on that listing, so you can contact them and arrange a viewing. So then you would view the property, hopefully you like it, and then you can submit your interest to them to say, you know what, I want this property and I want to move forward with it. But please be aware, you may not be the only person who is interested in it. So sometimes you win out and sometimes you lose, but either way, I would recommend submitting your interest as quickly as possible, just in case there is a lot of competition. So at that point, the letting agency will run a check on you to make sure you are who you say you are, make sure you earn the amount of money that you say you earn, and then if everything is okay, they will then offer you the property. So at that point, you will receive a tenancy agreement. Look it over. Look it over very carefully. Make sure it lists like rental costs, make sure it lists any utilities, whether they're included or not included. Take your time and really read through the tenancy agreement. If you have any friends or even a boss here in the UK that you trust, I wouldn't be against having them look over the tenancy agreement as well, just to make sure there isn't any hidden issues. But typically, if it is done through a letting agency, they will know the regulations and they will know the law, so everything should be okay. But just take your time when reading it. After you've looked over the tenancy agreement, everything looks okay, you'll just need to sign it and then submit it back to them. And then it'll just be a matter of finalizing any extra loose ends with the letting agency, getting your move-in date, and then moving into the property. If you do end up using a private landlord instead, it should be the same process, but rather than dealing with a letting agency as the middleman, you would be dealing with the landlord directly. What if you need help with the law around renting? Now, renting a property in a foreign country can feel very intimidating, especially when you don't know the law. I would recommend checking out Citizens Advice. They are a free service online. You can call people, you can communicate with people. They have tons of resources on their website, pretty much about everything when it comes to British life. But in particular, they have a guide on tenancy agreements, which I will put in the video description. But overall, if you have any issues with the law or with regulations when it comes to just about anything in the UK, Citizens Advice is a great resource. And don't be afraid to ask either. If you find that you're in a situation, especially when it comes to renting, and it just doesn't feel right, you know, even if you are a foreigner and you don't know the law, but in your gut, it just doesn't feel right, do not be afraid to reach out and ask for help. If you have any questions, please leave a comment down below. Definitely check out this video where I talk about how to get your first bank account. But until then, I'll see you in the next one.